Hello, and welcome to Veronica's Voice, the podcast for cycle breakers and legacy makers, where we keep it real, raw, and authentic.
Hello and welcome. Today I am talking with Hannah Taylor, and it is going to be a conversation between two intuitives. So we don't really know where this conversation is going to go. So you get to just be a fly on the wall while we chat. So just to start, Hannah teaches on personal responsibility for right relationship. And we're going to talk about what she means by that because it's probably means something different than what you may think. So she teaches on personal responsibility for right relationship and principles of devotional love. So yummy. She guides her clients to the deepest truth of who they want to be in their one and only life. So welcome, Hannah. I'm so happy to have you with me today.
Thank you, Veronica. It's just awesome to be on this podcast and speaking to you. And yeah, having read your work, it's like very much in alignment with what I do as well. So yeah, just really appreciate being here.
Yeah, awesome. Welcome. So if you can just start a little bit and explain what that means, what I just read. So teaching on personal responsibility for right relationship. Maybe we can start with like, what does that mean, right relationship?
Yeah, so right relationship is best thought of like integrity, in terms of integrity being a structural term. So oftentimes we think of integrity as doing the right thing when no one is watching. And of course, that is an endorsement of there being a right thing, and when I use right relationship, that's not a moral correctness. That is like, is the corner square? Is the corner square? Because if the corner is not square, it's not a corner and it's not going to hold the weight that it's supposed to hold, right? So integrity is really a structural term. Is this structure, this system, or this resource what it says it is? Will this bridge hold cars? Are the specs right in what it's supposed to be built to? So when we talk about right relationship, we're actually talking about creating a generative system. And like in permaculture, we want redundant nourishment, redundant resources in an ecosystem. Right relationship has all of these closed loops, all of these symbiotic systems where our pain has somewhere to be other than making chaos in our relationship.
I'm just pondering and absorbing and writing down what you just said. So is what I wrote down was, is this resource what it says it is? Like, that is so profound. And when you think of that in terms of relationship, there was so much that just like hit me just from that one sentence. By the way, if you're not familiar with Hannah, tell people where they can find you. And I'm going to tell you why in a minute. But first, Hannah, tell people where they can find you.
Well, if you want my writing, Facebook, I post a lot on Facebook, but also Substack. And that's 5 days a week. You get an email from me with some unique content. And I've gotten a lot of really good perspective on that. It's or feedback on that. It's hannahtaylor.substack.com.
Well, we'll put that in the show notes as well. And then on Facebook, you're Hannah Taylor on Facebook. So you all know
Yeah,
which
I'm really hard to find
her.
though.
Are
I'm
you?
not easy to find on Facebook. So Veronika,
interesting.
friends. So anyone who's friends with Veronika can find
That's true. That's true. You can find her through me. I'm sharing that. I want to tell you why I'm sharing that. I ran into Hannah on Facebook. I don't know how I found her, why I found her, or anything like that. But her Facebook posts are so profound. I'm probably going to use that word a lot today. Apologies if I'm redundant, but she has a way of like saying things that just like lands in my body. If you follow my work, you know that language is really important to me. Words are really important to me. And ironically, I find that I struggle sometimes with really articulating some of these big concepts, like some of the things we're going to talk about today. But in the healing world and transformation world, which we both work in, some of these concepts, like I experience them as energetic, and I struggle with finding the words. And Hannah has a way of like just saying it. And I'm like, yes, what she said. So that's why I invited Hannah for this conversation today, because I feel like she can express things in ways that just land. And so we're going to talk about boundaries today, by the way. So for those of you here listening, boundaries come up a lot in this space, and people who are in my space. So that's why I want to talk about that. But what you just said about is the resource what it says it is? I think that one question, if you're listening, I encourage you to write it down, because that's like the bottom line, really, of like a lot of the support that I provide people healing from narcissistic trauma. The resource was never what it said it was.
No.
And if we ask that question right at the beginning, it just saves so much pain.
Yeah. And kind of as we were chatting before, we talked about, you said, what do you do? And I said, reality. and this is an example of when we actually need a dose of reality, right? It's like someone who's really, we'll just say any type of abuser is going to come in with a lot of offers and promises, right? One of the major things that an abuser, like, I'll change, right? I'll stop abusing you. That's like one promise that an abuser is guaranteed to make at some point, right? And the thing is that if we're in delusion, then we see that as a future promise, right? And we see that as like money in the bank somewhere. But if we're in reality, we see that statement as the entire offer. When you're upset, I will reassure you with the idea that I will change. That's the whole offer.
Yes.
And when I say we get into reality, I mean we stop right there and we say that's the whole offer. This is not a promise of something else. We're right here and now. Here's the reality. When you're upset, this offer comes in, you stop being upset. That's the whole offer.
And it's so simple. When you describe it that way, it's so simple.
Yeah. My favorite thing that anyone's ever said about my work is that it's like, aha, but then it's like, duh.
Wait, what? Yeah, duh. But then also, can you share a little bit about, like, so it's so simple and we're like, oh yeah, duh, of course. And yet for a lot of people, it's difficult to implement. Otherwise we wouldn't be struggling with the things we're struggling with. So for that example right there, someone makes an offer when you're upset, and the offer is just, I'm going to say this, when you're upset, that's the whole offer. What have you found with people you work with that they struggle with, that keeps them stuck there, that keeps them believing that it's the future will get better? Why is that simple truth so difficult to embody?
We don't have a practice of being in the present.
Yeah.
Yeah. Because really the only time that anything can happen is right now. The only time we can receive is right now. The only time we can be open is right now. The only time we can experience success is right now. And when we're out of the habit of experiencing the infinite that's here and now, when we're out of touch with that, we go into a delusion that tells us why we don't have access to it right now and gives us the hope that it will be there in the future. But the truth is, we'd actually, even if those conditions arise, we're still in our practice of how we meet each moment.
Right. So then when those conditions arise, it's very likely that once again, you're going to be thinking about the future. And so you're not actually maybe not even aware that those conditions are right there for you to do whatever it is that you want to do.
Yeah, absolutely. And this is something that Byron Katie's work has really, really, really informed my work. Her work has been super, super, again, so simple, so revolutionary, so simple, but like her work just busts delusions. I mean, are you familiar with her stuff?
I know who she is, but I haven't myself, dove into her work. So yeah.
So the thing is that projections are guaranteed. They're necessary. We must make projections. We can't not do it. And we can't live a life if we don't make projections. And all projections are projections. They could come true and they're still a projection. They could be wrong and they're still a projection. And we have to be investing in them all the time. So really this delicate line that we walk is like, how do I project? And then how do I hold my projection with the lightest touch? How do I know that I need to be investing in something and then still not really attached to that thing that
not attached to it? Yeah, the attachment. I'd like to talk about that a little bit too. I want to circle back though to the present. So that really being present in this moment, and something that I talk about quite a bit and share with my clients also. So I'm curious, actually two questions. One is, what brought you to that state of being able to be really present? You mentioned Katie Byron's work. Is there anything else that brought you to be able to be present?
I mean, overwhelming grief, just absolutely obliterating grief. I lost my mother suddenly when I was 23. She was only 49. She had a blood clot in her leg that went to her heart and she dropped dead. So there was no warning. There was no one to blame. There was no, there's like a variety of risk factors and she had a lot of them. And so it's like, yeah, just nothing, no one to blame, nothing to do. And then in the wake of a grief like that, like nothing, like what are you going to throw at me that's going to hurt me right now? What could you possibly bring it, like, what could you possibly do? It's like, if you have like, I don't know, I don't even know what a metaphor is, but it's just like when you have an emotional pain that overwhelming, that completely unsolvable, completely faultless, it just wipes away all of these delusions we have that my emotions are a problem that I can fix, or that, there is a future at all, right? I had plans with my mother for the week after she died. She had plans to go and vacation with her friends. She had,
yeah, and now it's gone.
And not anymore,
Right.
and, I had a loving father who fell out of the sky when I was 5 years old, right? Like he died in a plane accident. And he wanted to stay. He wanted to stay. He wanted to raise me. And I'm abandoned all the same because death is inevitable and we can't know how many years we have on the planet.
Yeah. Yeah, thank you for sharing that. And I think sometimes it sounds cliche, but those big emotions, and especially grief, I feel like is one of the biggest, teachers for us. And it's, can we get to that level of presence without having experienced that intense emotion?
Can we get to the end of a human life without experiencing that intense emotion?
Yeah. I mean, it's a question that comes up for people. I work with people who have experienced deep pain, and it brings them to, if they're willing to move through that and come to the other side, it really can bring them to a beautiful place in life, and being able to really have all these deep understandings. It's a spiritual journey. They create amazing things in their life. But it's a question that I've been asked by clients and by colleagues, of can we evolve as human beings without experiencing such deep pain? In fact, recently a client shared with me that she was afraid of that. She's like, I know I have some big she's already experienced a lot in her life, but she was like, I know I have a lot of like lessons that are like in my space. And she was like, I'm afraid that I'm going to have to go through something really painful in order to really learn these lessons. So I was curious what you thought about that.
Yeah, I mean, I think that that's like a damaging correlation to make. I think a lot of people make that correlation and end up choosing these abusive relationships because, oh, there must be something for me here if it hurts.
Woof. There must be something for me here if it hurts. No pain, no gain, right? That is what we're taught in this world. Like, yeah, exactly. I'm not a believer in that either, even though my evolution sounds so weird, came through pain as well, but I don't think it's a requirement.
Yeah, the thing that I think the thing that I will say is that this great pain is guaranteed in the human life. The human condition is the guarantee of this pain. So like on that level, like, no, right? Like, no, you're not going to get out of this great pain. Absolutely not. But on the other hand, what each of us is actually is a learning, evolving being. Every single experience like teaches us, and every single experience evolves us. So whether it's painful or incredibly joyful, each experience, we are the thing that grows. Like I'm the thing that grows. I'm the thing that wakes up. I'm the thing that realizes more and more and more each day. So if it's pain, I'm going to learn from pain. If it's pleasure, I'm going to learn from pleasure because I'm the thing that learns from experiences. And this is the thing that can free us from this idea that I need to keep engaging with painful things, because it's like, oh, well, where will my growth come from then? Like, what? Like, okay, well, if you're not in pain, you're not going to need a haircut next month because your hair was like,
and And I love what you said about pleasure. I mean, I think it's something, at least in my space, we forget about. Yeah, I forget about. I have to remind myself. That pleasure is an incredible teacher. And in fact, I didn't ask you if we could talk about this. I don't think we were planning on talking about this, but here it is. So there you go, fly on the wall. You get to hear what comes up today. I think we've both been involved in like the kink world and kind of maybe pushing the boundaries somewhat in our personal lives in different ways. And to me, that was one of the greatest teachers of actually of boundaries and also of pleasure and sensation, and how just sensation, it can be pain, pleasure, and all the whole spectrum in between. But the more I experience, the more sensations I have, that's where I learn and evolve. It doesn't have to be pain. It can be pain, but
yeah, big time, big time. And what you're bringing up, really, it's a new take on what I have been kind of circling a lot in my work lately. The big message that I'm landing right now is about tone. And so kink is such a perfect way of understanding the tone, right? Because all of these things, right? If you were like, do I want to go get whipped in town today? Like, no.
that sounds like fun.
Probably not. Gonna get in the stockade. But this tone of opt-in, the tone of eroticism, the tension of desire that's been stretched, creates opening in our systems for these sensations to land in a pleasurable way, right? And what I like to say about tone is that emotion is like, when people talk about letting their feelings guide them, they're all too often talking about emotion, which is like the waves in the ocean, right? And tone is like the cardinal direction, right? So if I was on a ship, captaining the ship, and I was like, let's just get to that big wave over there, the crew would be like,
no, thank you. Calmer waters that way.
Bad leadership, right? So regardless of what the waves look like, I need to know my course is to the north, right?
Mm-hmm.
And the north might be love, right? I know my course is to the north, and whatever waves are on that journey, I either need to survive them or die in that, because love is where I'm going, right? And so that's what it means to be in like a tone, is that all these emotions, all the waves are still going to be present, but like they're present in a different way. Just like being whipped in town is different than being whipped in the dungeon, right? It's like this opt-in, this eroticism, this whole tone of consent, this whole tone of creation, co-creation, completely changes the context for all these actions, all of these emotions.
Absolutely. I love that comparison. And the description of consent and what you're talking about, the waves, right? So one of the things that I love about kink is the consent and the container and the boundaries, if it's done the way it's intended to be done, right? So I understand in any world, there's relationships that are healthy and relationships that that are unhealthy. Same thing in kink. There's people who do it in a healthy way and people who do it in an unhealthy way. So of course I'm talking about the well-resourced kink. What I love about it is the consent and the boundaries and everybody is in full ownership of who they are, what they bring, what their roles are. Everything is discussed and the consent about it. And I feel like kink has taught me so many lessons that are so applicable to life, like we're talking about here. And one is exactly what you're just talking about with the waves and pointing to your true north. Like for me in my work, I talk about that as like holding the vision. Like I have a vision for kind of what you're talking about, projections, maybe. I have a vision for what I want to create and co-create in my life. And then there's all these waves in between. But if I'm like, oh, I know I need to go this way in order to get there, then I'm like, yep, this is painful, but I can ride through it, Whereas
I've been saying thriving also sucks sometimes.
Thriving, yeah, that's true. I'm doing great. But if you're just like at the whim of the universe and you're just like, I'm just here, I don't know what I'm doing, and then just things are coming at you and pain's coming at you, I think that feels terrible. You're like, what? why would I be here just receiving pain, just without purpose, I guess. I don't know if that's what you were saying with the boat thing, but that's what I was hearing.
Yeah, I mean, well, it's like if you don't have a sense of that true north, and some people don't even have a compass, right? And some people don't even have a boat, right? So yeah, you do need to like avoid that giant wave or get to a smaller or get to a calmer sea. Like there is this sense, I call it a pristine container. People will be like, oh, can I, like, are my boundaries really based on what I need, or are they based on my wounding? And I'm like, wouldn't you need it more if it's based on your wounding? Like, I don't know.
We have to dive into that in a moment because I don't think I understand that statement, but go ahead and finish your current thought.
Yeah. So people will be like, is it a legitimate boundary, or is this based on my prior wounding, for example?
Oh, I see what you're saying. Yes.
And I'm like, well, like a cast on your arm is based on your prior wounding. I recommend you keep it, right? But a pristine container is a lot like that cast, right? It's like when we see ourselves in any sort of emergency, if we see ourselves managing just way too much, there is this sense of like protection and safety that we can really establish, and I call it a pristine container, where we're not challenged at all. So if anyone is beginning a real boundary exploration, the first thing is this pristine container where you eliminate all engagement with all relationships that challenge you even a little bit.
You recommend removing those relationships?
I recommend creating a container, right? I don't like pitch those people out of your life forever, right? But like while you're learning what it is to relate in a healthy way, especially if you
while you're learning,
experienced an unhealthy way, it's like a cast on your leg. It's like you're not going to walk on it, and it needs this extra protection, and that is right. And people talk about crutches all the time. Oh, that's a crutch. Oh, so-and-so is using a crutch. I'm like, who uses crutches? People with broken legs, and then they get super inconvenient. Who's using a crutch that's healthy? Like,
right.
It doesn't make any sense.
Good point.
Yeah. It's not a pleasant experience actually to be using crutches if we get about it. It's what we do when we're injured or when we're depleted in some way. So this person who's exhausted, who's in the sea, getting to a calmer space can let them understand, like, oh, here is my compass. Oh, here is my true north. Oh, here is my vision, right? But in the throes of emergency, we can't do that. And this is another problem with this idea that I grow from pain or painful experiences, because it keeps us in those steep waves, deep water, where we actually can't ever make a plan. And we feel really, really righteous. We feel really on purpose because we're managing an emergency. We're sanctimonious, like the world shouldn't be throwing this at me, but I am surviving anyway, And it's a worthy life if you want to like that.
Yeah, absolutely. That's a really good point. And I think, in the narcissistic trauma community, there's a lot of talk about no contact, right? And I think I see that very similar to what you just described, like, because a lot of times we have people in our lives who we would rather keep in our lives, but maybe they have a personality, I don't like the word disorder, but they have, a personality complex that makes it difficult to have them in your life. For me, no contact is what you just talked about. It's like you have got to get out of the chaos, give yourself time to rest, and give yourself time to heal, like you were talking about with the cast. Such a great comparison. And this is one of the things I love about boundaries, and maybe we'll wrap up by talking about that a little bit more, is that what I have found is that when a person has really become, I think you use the word, or maybe it's from someone else, like self-resource, but it's like you're fully whole. I don't like the word healed, but like let's just use the cast example. Your leg has fully healed and you've taken the cast off. Boundaries, I don't even like the term boundaries. They become effortless. Because when you're in the present, like you were talking about, when you're fully present and you're fully aware of who you are as a being, your projections, all those things, you will just set boundaries. It's kind of like your skin being on your body. It is a boundary.
Really just going to use the skin.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
So you don't think like I have to protect my insides from the outside world. It's just there. And that's what, go ahead.
Well, but you might think, I want to put lotion on today. You might think, I want to put makeup on today. You might think, I'd love a feather touch, or I'd love a slap, right? because
Yes.
boundaries are a point of connection, like your skin. They aren't just protection. They are like palpation, right? We can feel with our boundaries, right?
And we
Like,
take care of ourselves with our boundaries, like you were like lotion or touch, or it's all about what feels good to me right now. And
well,
that
but boundaries are the site of connection. And that's
right.
missing from the boundary conversation. Boundaries are all about, what do you not want? What are you keeping away from you? Right. But
And
when we,
that's why I don't like the word boundaries, because it brings up that image of like this freaking like like you're inside the jail with the with the full on wall and barbed wire fence and everything. And I'm like, that's not what boundaries are.
well, yeah, but if we talk about a land boundary, right? Like, what is a land boundary, right? It's a false distinction. Here we are in bodies, which we could argue are false distinctions, right? So where the land touches the land, right? So it's like the boundary is actually the point that the land connects to something else, always, right? And we think of these like fortresses or protections, but like boundaries are those points of connection. And that's one of the tenets of Abundantly Boundaried, the course on boundaries that
Yeah, tell us about that.
Yeah. So one of the tenets is that boundaries are points of connection. They're not walls that keep other people out, right? Boundaries are where the love is flowing, not where you feel okay or willing to be in the relationship, not where you can handle what's being thrown at you. Boundaries are where you're like, oh yeah, I love this person.
I love that. Not where you can handle what's being thrown at you. Yes. Like that's what people think of.
Yeah. So people are setting their boundaries on the brink of their injury. And then when the boundaries are crossed, they're like, oh no, I'm injured. Well, obviously, you set your boundaries on the brink of injury. Right. And so let's talk about the castle walls, right? Let's talk about the castle. Where is the queen? She's not on the walls.
Right. She's inside.
Yeah. Her protectors are
Deep inside, probably.
out there, way away. Her protectors are out on that wall. And all of us have protectors out on the wall. All of us do. We have our military, we have our police, and we've been really distanced from our protectors narratively in the last few years. And I encourage anyone to get a little suspicious about that narrative. But if you,
I love your work, Hannah. We didn't even touch about like masculine and all that. That's another thing I love. Maybe we'll do another conversation about the masculine and the protectors, like you were just talking about, and
yeah,
our distance from our protectors.
I have a post in the queue waiting for that one. So
okay, cool. Can't wait.
But we all have protectors on the wall, actually. And so, each of us, if we're on that wall, if we're on the protection wall, it's because we left the throne and walked and walked and walked and walked and walked through the castle all the way to the wall to stand there and be like, please don't shoot at me. Right?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. And something that I talk about is similar concept, maybe a little bit different. As far as like being in that fortress, being in that castle, is that if you're at that place of like protection, like, oh my God, I need to put up the gates and get my people on the moat and firing, right? There's a whole lot. So you're at war. If you're at that place where you're like, oh my God, stay away, I'm injured, it's kind of the injury thing, right? There's a whole lot that happened for somebody to come up to your castle gates and be shooting at you.
Yeah.
And I contend, and I think this is what you're saying about it's a different way of the connection piece, is like, what happened on that space, that land between their castle and your castle? What was the point of connection there? Because if they're showing you that they're gonna freaking attack you, okay, then maybe those boundaries should have been set differently much sooner. Or if there's a point of that point of connection, and then you're in the land in between the two castles frolicking, right? Like, you shouldn't be at a point where you're like in your castle freaking out, because that means that a lot of things didn't take place that could have to prevent that.
Yeah. And if we want to just continue this metaphor and talk about why people are in the castle freaking out, it's because a lot of us inherited that war.
Absolutely.
And the practices of war and the practices of being in fear and the practices of relating through conflict.
I
These
love
are
that. Practices of being in fear and practices of relating through conflict. I just want to just pause for a minute because I think those are so powerful for you listening. You know, these things that we're battling or struggling with in our daily lives are things that we've been conditioned into, things we've been born into, things that have come through multiple generations, and fear and engaging through from a place of conflict rather than from a place of connection. And I think that's maybe the key difference in your work, Hannah, that I see when I read your things, your posts, is that it's all about that connection. It's not, boundaries isn't about war and protecting yourself. It's like you were saying, it's connection. And when you live in the presence, in presence and in the present, and from that place of connection, all these other things go away. They become irrelevant. Boundaries become irrelevant. Conflict becomes irrelevant in the way that we've been talking about it.
Yeah, well, but I do want to get very clear about when I say these are practices, when I say these are skills, right? Not doing the skill is not the same thing as doing a new skill, right?
Yeah.
We're like, oh, I need to stop this toxic pattern. And I'm like, again, it's like, okay, is your hair going to stop growing? Right? Like you are doing something all the time.
Mm-hmm.
You are always spending your life in a certain way. The time is passing regardless of what you do with it. Right. And whatever you're doing is your practice. Right. So you need to be taught. When you interact with, here's the fun thing about interacting with like toddlers, right? Like there's no object you can hand them that they know how to use correctly, right? If they've never seen it before, they have no idea. It's going in their mouth first, right? Like probably. But toddlers are a great reminder that like, I know how to use this. I think everyone knows how to use this. So I'm going to hand it to you and like, holy shit, what did you do with that? It's like, it's a reminder that like, we only know what we know.
Yeah.
And we actually don't know what we don't know. So
right.
There's people who are like, oh yeah, I want to relate in a healthier way. So I'm going to like do a better job of explaining why I'm upset.
Yes.
Right. And explaining why you're upset is a way that you're spending one sacred hour of time with the one you say you love. And your upset is authentic and it's true. And it's not the only authentic, true thing that you might bring into the connection right now. You might bring anything into the connection right now. You might spend that hour doing anything with that person you say you love so much. But your practice and your habit is to be like, here's my shittiest emotion. I think it's about you. What do you think?
I love that so much. It's true. And what are we focusing on? We're focusing on the unhealthy, whatever, the difficulty, the painful things.
The problems. Yeah.
Problems.
We know problems. We know how to.
And we make it somebody else's problem.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. Instead of resolving it ourselves. Oh, I just randomly said something that I was like, oh no, I shouldn't have said that because we need to unpack that.
It's intelligent, right? Because the thing is like, we can think that we can resolve it ourselves, but we actually cannot, right? And I use the example of an oil change, right? Like I haven't ever performed an oil change on my car. When I take responsibility for my oil change, I bring it to an open mechanic shop that has time. They do it and I pay them. And I handled it, right? So it's like, it is true that we need other people in this.
Yep.
It is not true that we can handle it ourselves. And I think that's why you're like, oh, I said something.
Yeah, exactly. I was like,
like it is like handling it ourselves does not mean we're handling it alone. It means that we're not bringing it to the person we think it's about.
Right. Yeah. Bring it to the person that can actually, I mean, like, you're not going to bring your oil change to me. Like if you came to me and you're like, Veronika, I need an oil change, I'd be like, what do you want me to do about it?
Well, yeah, but if we were sharing a car, right, I could have all the justification in the world. Like, hi, Veronika, my oil change is here. That happens every 10,000 miles. Let's discuss how many miles you drove. Where did you go? What's that like for you? And then I'll tell you about all the miles I drove and where I went and how how that went for me. And this is the why part of psychology that doesn't make sense to me, right?
I'm so glad you brought that example up. My whole system is like contracting and like, that's so barfy. I don't want to spend an hour talking about how many miles I drove and how many miles you drove. But that's exactly what people do in relationship. I'm so glad we went there. Cool. So I have a question that I've been wanting to ask. I'll ask it, and then we're going to wrap up with sharing how people can find you and your course that's available online, which I'm super excited about. So if there was one thing that you would share with people, so you're like, people don't know what they don't know, and they can't change in ways that they don't even know. What's like the one thing that you would say someone can start doing right now, or can consider? They might need help. They might need support with it, but
Look with loving eyes. That's the whole thing. And it is a meditation, as in it is the wander and the return. So it's sacred to be looking with loving eyes, and it's sacred to notice that you haven't been looking with loving eyes.
That's beautiful. Thank you for sharing that. Look with loving eyes and notice where you haven't been looking with loving eyes. Oh, I kind of want to end right there. Just briefly, you started talking about the tenets of your course, Abundantly Boundaried, but I would like to give you the opportunity to share briefly about that.
Oh yeah. So the last two, so we talked about boundaries as points of connection. We went way over that, but these other two stand for themselves as well. Boundaries are standards. My boundaries are my standards for what's allowed in my life. And then my boundaries are what I show up for and how I show up.
Awesome.
And so that one works as a tool of discernment too. So it's like what I'll show up for is informed by my standard for how I've committed to showing up. So if I know I need to show up in love and approval and kindness and caring, there are so many situations I absolutely cannot show up for.
Right.
But then I can't hold that.
Exactly. I love, like, that's, people just buy her course, people. It's really it's super affordable. And like what you just said, I don't want to give away everything, but like, I just love what you said right now, because it's about how you show up. I think people don't understand that. They're more in the oil change example. I'm setting my boundary through asking you to telling you all the stuff, rather than like, your boundaries, I'm choosing to show up in a certain way. And when you show up in a certain way, things that are not in alignment with that are not going to be present for you, because they're incompatible.
Yeah.
You don't even have to worry about all these other things that you're worried about, because you're showing up in a different way.
Yeah, and you're getting all the way inside your own business.
You're getting all the way inside your own business.
Rather than thinking, being out in someone else's. And this is something that I've said so much more in the past 2 years than I've ever said in my life. Just like, hey, that isn't my business. That's not my business. That's not my business. So I'm in the poly land. I'm much more in the poly land than in the kink community, but there's so much crossover there.
There's a lot of crossover. Yeah.
But it'll be something like, my other partner is telling me that they're
Pause really quick. So when she's talking about you're talking about polyamorous, right?
Polyamorous.
So yeah. multiple love relationships. Is that
multiple love relationships? Yeah. So if a partner says to me, and this is, polyamory is a beautiful, beautiful space to examine codependency, because like most people go from codependent monogamous to codependent polyamorous. Yep. And think that it's going to fix it. I did that. What it does is it makes this dynamic unignorable, actually. So what people will say is like, my partner feels this way about our connection. And I'm like, that is not my business. It's not my business, because our connection is not material to your connection with them. And like what they think about me and feel about me is not my business, because if they want to bring it into our connection, yes. Right? If we are going to talk about it, yes. But if you're just telling me what someone else thinks or says about me, all you're doing is planting intrusive thoughts and complexes into our relationship from there on. Right? And so it's like, this is the kind of thing, like, I don't show up for hearing other people's judgments about me, because it's simply not my business.
Yep. I love that explanation. I don't show up for what other people think about me. Yeah, I often say, it's not what other people think about you. What other people think or feel is not your responsibility. But I love the way that you said that. Like, I don't show up for that. That's for them to manage. If they feel a certain way about me, that it's all about them. It has nothing to do with you.
And the worst thing it's going to do is like make it hard for me to look with loving eyes, right? So I'm showing up in ways that will make it easy for me to look with loving eyes. I'm showing up to people that are easy for me to love, right? And all of this is about fit. And that's why destroying the moralization is so important. It's like, you're not accepting people into your life because they're good people and rejecting people because they're bad people. You're actually not great at boundaries until you're rejecting excellent people. Or simple non-fit.
Or non-fit. Yes, exactly. Ugh. And that's something, I hear a lot is when people don't want to end a relationship, whether it's romantic or friendship or business, they're like, they're not a bad person. I'm like, where did that, I didn't ask if they were a bad person. Like, where did that even come up? You can end a relationship with someone who's not a bad person, and ending a relationship with them doesn't mean that you are saying that they're a bad person, whether it's friendship, work, romantic. All you're saying is, it's not a fit for me.
Well, and that's it's hilarious pride. That's why I laugh at it, right? It's like, I am the most essential resource in the universe. Here I go, depriving someone else of the most amazing resource they can ever experience.
Oh my gosh, that's awesome.
Do this to them.
They're gonna feel terrible. Or you've just like given them the freedom to like freaking have other people in their life who are in alignment with them. It's a gift. Ending a relationship is a gift. And we could do a whole nother hour about relationships.
I think we could do another like 9 hours.
I know, right? One of these days we're just gonna do we'll just do like a 9-hour jam and just talk about whatever, and people can just pop in and out.
I love it.
That won't be today. Look with loving eyes. That's the bottom line from today. Check out Hannah Taylor's Abundantly Boundaried course. The link is in the show notes, and also find her on Facebook and tell us again, it'll be in the notes, but tell us again where they can find your daily, you're on
HannahTaylor.substack.com.
HannahTaylor.substack.com. You do not want to miss her words, because her words will profoundly change your life. Thank you for joining us today. We'll see you next time.
Thank you for joining me on Veronica's Voice. If you took something away from today's episode, remember to like, share, and subscribe so others can benefit as well. See you next time.